You told me that's. Oh, no? Yeah.
Dana was here.
Go and enjoy it.
5:30 minutes.
Oh, no way, today.
So he went
Yeah,
over
that's
there.
pretty good at the hours.
He's coming out.
So,
He'll be here.
so that's just.
Yeah, well, especially when it's right.
He's here.
Yeah, what? Sorry. E. With that.
Do you remember what the login was? I don't. Okay. Oh, Lord.
And it's the guest room.
Yes.
No.
Oh, Lord.
No.
The meeting is called to order. Let's see, we have one regular member, full member missing tonight, so Dana, I'll ask you to just sit in for him and the voting member tonight. We have two agenda items. We have a public hearing on marijuana bill, and Mr. Lorenzi and Kelly Beecham are here for that. And we also have a continuing public hearing on the Manitoba Woodland subdivision and some further discussion about that application. So let's begin with marijuana bill. Tonight is the public hearing, and our process is typically to hold the public hearing, to have discussion, to allow the planning board to ask questions and so forth. And if there are members of the public who want to make comment or have questions, we would ask them to come forward to do that. And so I'd like to start. I know that you've presented your project before, but if you could just do a brief summary, and I will open the public hearing. And if you could do a brief summary, anyone who is listening or comes in who might want to comment will have that basic information like everyone else does. There were also a couple of issues that we had asked you to respond to last time, and I know you submitted some information. So you might want to summarize your responses to those questions as well.
Sure. Thank you again for letting me speak and hearing me out here. As we know, I'm looking to put a cannabis shop. Actually, it's my daughter, Carol McGeechan, is putting a retail caregiver cannabis shop. As we talked about last time, you have the different types. You have the adult use, you have the medical caregiver, and you have the medical dispensaries. This one is an adult caregiver, a medical caregiver store. We're looking to do it at, it was the old Marana Cook Market right by the ring, by the train tracks there. I own 6 stores currently, and I've got a bunch in the works. I'll be running the business. We're in state, local code compliance with all of them. You could call OCP, they'll give you, and ask them about how we run our businesses. We're completely legal. As far as the conditions or the things that you expressed last time, the signage, I submitted to the code officer. The proposal for the signage is to use the existing sign, the pole that is there, not illuminating it. And I gave kind of a the design company made a brief sketch of it, I believe, and with the specs for it, and externally light it, again, in compliance with your lighting ordinances. I'm not exactly sure, but Mr. Stevens and the sign company would make sure that's adequate. The other thing you guys expressed concern with, if I remember correctly, is the turnaround and the curbage by the railroad track to the danger because of what happened, I guess, up the road earlier summer. So I submitted a diagram. What it shows is we're looking to diagrams where the parking is going to go to show that one of the members had questions about how much parking we have. We have plenty of parking. And we're going to eliminate one of the curb cuts, or we're going to use the landscaping. Well, we're proposing to use landscaping, those big, I don't know what you call them, the ones that you put like the trees and shrubs in, to go all the way across and then have our one opening. The one opening, again, somebody mentioned about how to mark it, so enter and exit. I put a picture of something that we would like to propose a use, but it can be changed. It's like basically when you go into like the Dunkin' Donuts or the things, you have one entrance and one exit. So that way it's very clear how to get in and out of it, and you eliminate anybody doing any turnaround traffic because there's only that one curb cut now. We also eliminated the curb that's closer to railroad tracks, because obviously I felt that was more dangerous than the one farther away. I believe that's all the concerns that you might have had. I just wanted to
the one other thing that I remember that was raised is that through the application, there were several references to dispensary, and I know that was just a holdover from earlier written material, but we did ask you to make sure that those were removed.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
So just take them out of the application?
Yeah, because we're not talking about the dispensary. And I also noticed the picture of the sign that you sent also says dispensary.
Okay. Okay. Just for clarification, the state defines dispensary as your ordinance. We can remove it, don't get me wrong, but every caregiver store in the state refers to it as a dispensary, even though the code with the state and your ordinance says it's a retail caregiver. They're actually still called dispensaries. Even if the inspectors call you, they will call you. But again, I'll eliminate it. I'll take it out of the sign.
And the only reason I raise it as an issue is that Readfield's ordinance is very specific about the types of marijuana establishments that the town has opted in for. And specifically dispensaries were not opted in.
Okay.
So that's
so if I propose to put medical caregiver retail store,
that's fine.
would that suit? Okay.
I have a question about the height of the sign.
I'm sorry, sir.
I have a question about the height of the sign.
I was proposed to leave the same, the existing pole, whatever it is there.
I think the problem is ordinance says no sign should be displayed more than 20 feet above grade.
Okay.
Schematic, I don't know if it's right, said it was 7 foot.
So that's the width.
No,
Well, it looks a lot higher than 7.
it
7
does.
feet's not very tall, so I guess it left a question about what the height actually
It
was.
was 7 feet 1 inch in width,
Right.
3 feet
Okay.
6 inches in height. But it's total is more than 20 feet.
Okay, so again, this was just a proposal because we were trying to use the existing signage that was there. I know it's not probably not grandfathered, but, you know, a lot of times when there's existing sign, it is grandfathered because you have to tear the whole thing down, but if that's not adequate, can we put a sign on the building? Because I'll just put one on the building, or I'll remove that sign and put a new one.
I think the language in the ordinance is that it can't be from the top of the sign, it can't be higher than 20 feet, or the height of the roof line of the principal structure, whichever is less. So I assume the 20 feet would be less.
Yeah, it's a pretty tall building, so yeah.
Now, so the height of the pole itself is not our concern, it's the height top of the sign. But I think it's actually pretty close, you want to measure that to see if the top of your proposed sign would be more than 20 feet. I'm not sure that it would be.
Is that in the diagram?
What's that?
Is the height in the diagram? I thought it was.
It's not.
It's not, okay.
So
Okay, so, I mean,
You could bring the sign down on the current
well,
pole.
that's what I was just
Yeah.
gonna ask, if we shorten the pole.
Yeah.
To the registered height, I mean, we could do that, I'm sure.
So the top of the sign can't be any higher. You measure from the top of the sign.
Top of sign, and what is it, 20 feet?
20 feet.
Okay.
That's the maximum.
Maybe I gotta look at that diagram more, I thought I read somewhere in there from the sign company that they had 20 feet, but it might not be in there.
And maybe that's true, but we just didn't have a
It
height
it probably,
in
it's not in there,
materials.
because I just said whatever they had, so.
what did you do about the lighting? Did you,
For the sign,
no, for the building?
I just put exterior side, lighting around, I'm actually in the process, we still haven't finished it. But it's the 3/4 cutoff, and again, it's within whatever,
What is 3/4 cone?
so it doesn't blind people when they're driving, like ones that are right in your face. Most cities have either full cutoff or 3/4 cutoff, so that way when you're driving, you're not blinded.
Are they about 10 feet off the ground? I was noticing.
Does it have to be 10 feet or less than
No,
10 feet?
it doesn't have to be any height. I was just wondering if that's what the lighting is.
I think the lighting is actually at like 9 feet,
Okay.
but I'm not positive, because they went right through the exterior of the wall.
It's where I see on the building right now. We have
Yes, it should be, we submitted a diagram in the beginning that should have had the markings of the lighting on the outside, and that was to scale, so. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly the details, because honestly, I do a lot of diagrams. But it should, yeah, I don't know if the diagram does this height, but I know it's right around 9 feet, only because they go through the wall where the drop ceiling is, and the store's at 9, and it's right through the wall, so it's no more than.
It's on the whole.
Yeah, the whole building, with 2, I believe, if I remember correctly, there's 2 on each side, 2 on the front, and either 2 in the back, one might be up and one might be lower, because there's a fire thing in the back.
It's all down lighting.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, it's all 3/4 cutoff. Which you make full cutoff is you just want to turn it forward, they're adjustable, but they don't go more than 3/4, which means it just casts out a little more. Then the other one's full cutoff, you really only get the circle.
Really gonna be open 365 days.
I've never closed in Waterville from the day I opened or any of my shops ever.
I'm looking at a picture of this sign online. I mean, I can't tell, but it looks like it's close to 20 feet
Mhm.
and it's been there forever. I mean, if it's 20.5 feet or 21 feet, are we gonna really cause him to make that change or?
Well, I mean, we don't,
Slide it down on the pole.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a fixed metal structure on the top. It's already built in. So were you planning on putting a sign on the?
What the sign company proposed, again, I hire
Yeah.
a sign company that usually deal with it, but they were seeing if it was possible to use the existing structure, and yeah, we get rid of the illumination.
Yeah,
This is external, and then add the thing, but I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't measure it, I didn't find it there, I didn't.
well, I mean, you know, I think that's the place to start.
But I will.
And then
I mean,
we'll
I'll go
know,
measure.
you know, we'll know what's there,
Yeah.
and it may well be 20 feet.
Yeah.
You know, if it's been there.
I'm 90% sure I read somewhere, and again, it might have been in a corresponding email that I didn't convey over. But I'm almost positive I read 20 somewhere. But I can't, you know, I can call them in 5 minutes and find out tomorrow morning, because they went out there and measured and everything. And then I thought, did they reach out to you, Mr. Stevens, or
So,
did the sign company reach out to you at all?
a couple times, yeah.
Because their job is actually, they coordinate with all the cities. I use them on every one of my jobs. And they go in to make sure that we're in the code and compliance.
It looks like the sign actually belonged to the garage next door.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
Then I found out it was ours.
That's what it was, yours. It's kind of a distance from your shop.
That's what I said too.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is not change the whole thing of it, because what I'm under the impression, and maybe I'm wrong, that if you want to keep the integrity of the structures as much as possible.
Yeah.
So, because if it's up to me, knock the pole, put it right on the building, problem solved, and you know what I mean? But I was told somebody doesn't like that idea, so back away.
Could you just comment? Sorry, I wasn't here the last time.
Oh, no, absolutely.
So thank you for your patience. Could you just comment on your operating hours,
Yep.
staff load, how you're gonna manage the business, manage the property?
We operate from 6 AM to 10 PM. And the reason why we're earlier or later, you see a lot of these stores that open like in the middle of the day to like the 7 o'clock or whatever it is. The problem with that is most of the people are actually using marijuana for medicine. There are actually people who do that, believe it or not. I didn't believe it. Because don't get me wrong, there are people that don't, but those are guys that go to work and come home from work and all that. So we found that we get more of those people on their way to work at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. So we started opening up earlier. Same reason why we stay open later. We have a lot of, believe it or not, people from the hospital and stuff that show up at like 9:45 because they just get done at 9 o'clock. So we open 365 days a year. 6 to, like I said, 6 in the morning to 10 at night. We'll play with that. If it's not a busy traffic in the morning, we might bump that up to 7, but we never open up later than 7 unless there's a city ordinance against it, which there are none that I have except Gardner, with in the process of changing right now. So yeah, as far as the hours, that was it.
Okay. And how many employees will you have on site?
Two on each shift, but we'll juggle it compared if it gets busier, like certain times of the years, we may have 3 on, we may have 4 on. We
So
start.
minimum of 2.
No, 2, basically for safety reasons. You know what I mean? Even though we, like I said, I think I probably should go back into this. We have a full alarm system with panic buttons that are to police and all that. We have 24-hour, we're on a backlog of a month of recordings, completely recording every inch of the place except for the bathroom, log against that. And then on the outside of the building, complete coverage. So we've actually never had to use it ourselves. We probably used it for police departments 6 times in my stores, with an accident out in front or, yeah.
And just because I don't know, do the employees, are employees that work at a dispensary or a caregiver, are they licensed individually? Or are
Okay,
they
anybody who's
trained or-
gonna work, yeah, anybody who's gonna work in a, whether it's any of them don't use, it's a separate one, but medical or dispensaries, they gotta get what they call a RIC card. And with that is basically you're registered with the state, so they go through a little background check to make sure they don't have any felonies, drug convictions, anything like
And
that.
they have to be over 21.
Yes, yeah, over 21.
Interesting, thanks.
On top of that, just so you know, we actually are, again, this is hers technically, but we do random drug testing too, a couple times a year.
Other questions, planning board members? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm gonna- So I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who has comments or questions about this application, or anyone online. No one in the Zoom space. Okay. So at this point, I would take a motion to close the hearing. John moves, Jack seconds. Discussion? All those in favor? Okay, so planning board members, what's your pleasure? Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the application as amended, subject to review by the code enforcement officer and the chair of the planning board of the sign, of the final sign.
And Steve.
And standard conditions.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Peter seconds. And I would remind everyone that this application is subject to both the site review standards as well as the marijuana establishment ordinance standards. So there are two sets there that we've been looking at. And the approval would extend to both of those sets of standards. We have a motion and a second. Is there a discussion?
Process wise, does it go to the select board now?
It does. If and when we approve it, it is then forwarded to the select board, and the process is that they do what in the ordinance is called a final review and approval. Only of the marijuana ordinance standards, however, not the site review standards.
I was able to just do like a quick calculation on the side of that, using a telephone pole next to it, and it says 18.3 feet. So I mean, Chip can validate that when he goes back up there, when you take.
I'll climb up there and drop it.
But I think it's
That'd be
probably,
good.
I think you're probably okay, but you have to check.
I'll send somebody tomorrow, and this will call.
Yeah, send Chip up.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Dana is voting tonight, and that's a full complement.
Sort of participant.
It'll come back,
There we
it's
go.
just a projector.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, I appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.
You got it.
Any roll call?
Our second agenda item for tonight, as I mentioned, is the Manitoba Woodward subdivision, and it's been a while since we've talked about this. And I think probably, I'd like to start maybe by just putting out a brief summary of where we are process-wise, so everyone recalls and we're on the same page with that. When we last met on this application, I was back in September, the 10th of September, we held a public hearing. And the hearing was left open at that time. There were a number of questions and issues that came up. The hearing was left open, so tonight technically is a continuation of that public hearing and whatever discussion or deliberation might ensue. The process generally, we determined that this was a major subdivision since it's greater than 3 lots. And the process for a major subdivision in the land use ordinance is, it's really a 3-stage process that's laid out. The first piece of it is what's called a sketch plan review that has basic information about a proposed subdivision. The second step is the submission of a preliminary plan, and that really is where the majority of the information comes in that preliminary plan, and that is the stage that we're in currently. And we had agreed earlier that because the information came in all at once, the sketch plan and the preliminary plan were really combined into a single package. So we were dealing with those together. And when we finish with this phase of it, there will still be the final plan to consider. So there is another step in this process, which involves another public hearing. And that is the final plan review. But as I said, the majority of the information, the data that's required, we already have because it's required in the preliminary plan stage. So a brief summary, the initial presentation of this application and the initial discussion that the planning board had was on April 9th. There were a number of pieces of information that came in following that meeting on the 26th of April. And we had 2 letters from Mr. Benke, who was representing a number of property owners on Manitoba. And so we had some comment at that point from them. May 14th, the planning board took the issue up again. We did further review and discussion, and our focus at that point was on application completeness only. We really didn't get into the substance of the issues. We were still determining completeness. And again, identified were a number of different questions and issues that required some additional information and submission. So the application was revised by the applicant in July, mid-July, and at our August meeting, the planning board found the application complete. We held the hearing, as I mentioned, on the 10th of September of last year, and also conducted a site visit at that time. And we had a number of interested party comments at that public hearing as well. We had requested that the applicant respond to many of those comments in writing, which they did in mid-December. So we do have the written response, and hopefully you've all had a chance to spend some time with that, because the responses were quite extensive, and I found them very helpful in terms of understanding some of the issues that were raised and in responding to those. Mr. Benke submitted last week a letter which you all received from Chip that addressed one of the issues, which had to do with the adequacy of the stormwater evaluation. And so hopefully you've all had a chance to look at that as well. There were many issues and questions that were raised through the course of the review of the application, and the applicant has responded to all of those issues that have been raised. It's obviously up to the planning board, however, to determine if, through the responses, we can determine that the applicant's fully demonstrated compliance with all the standards. I'm not going to go through all of those issues again. You have them in front of you, and you've all had a chance to take a look at them and review them, and I'm sure some of those issues will be raised again tonight, both by the applicant and by interested parties. But I do want to thank both Mainland, Mr. Lawrence, and Mr. Benke and other interested parties for their engagement in this process and for all the information you put forward. It's been really helpful. So thank you very much for that. I do think Mainland went above and beyond in putting together detailed responses, and we really appreciate that. So I would direct your attention again to that letter which we received in mid-December. A lot of information in here. There were certain issues that were identified and raised that are specifically in the ordinance treated as issues that would be addressed during the final plan review. So keep in mind that there are some of those. There are certain details that certainly could be addressed earlier, but are not required to be addressed until the submission of the final plan. So that's just something to keep in mind. So tonight, as I mentioned, it's a continuation of the public hearing. It's an opportunity for both the applicant and interested parties to comment, ask questions, and also a chance for the planning board to ask questions of both the applicant and interested parties, and potentially to deliberate on the application further. So are there any questions or comments about where we are in process and where we're headed with this? If not, I think probably the best place for us to start would be the applicant would like to, I'm not sure how you want to come at this exactly. I would expect that you might want to highlight some of the principal issues and, feel free to highlight those things that you think are most important or that you think the planning board should hear again, however you'd like to approach that. Is fine with us.
Thank you. It's been a while, and I apologize for the gap in the progress. My name is Bob Berry. I own and am president of Mainland Development Consultants. And here tonight with me is Mr. John Lawrence. He's the applicant. And Tanner Burnett is a civil engineer extraordinaire in our office, and is here helping me tonight. We received, and as instructed by the board, responded to Mr. Banky's first letter, and in detail. It took us a while to get that to you. There was a lot to chug through there, so my apologies again for the delay. Eventually, we got that response back to you, and then we got a response to the response. This is how these normally go, right, with big, complicated projects. I get it, it's okay. A response to the response, we got that late last week, so not a lot of time to respond, but we did it. I am prepared tonight to go over the first letter and the second letter in detail and respond to any issue that you, as the board, want me to detail. Stormwater, well water, MNAP and main IF&W, and you pick your topic that's in those letters. I'm prepared to talk about it tonight. But this is the public hearing, so I could use up all the time myself, and I don't want to do that. I would love to finish hearing from the public on this project, and then I would really appreciate a chance to respond orally. We didn't get that chance last time, and I've been kind of losing sleep over it for 4 months. So it's the way I'm wired. I would love to be able to talk to you folks at the end, but I would still love to hear from the public. So that's all I've got.
I'm assuming that most of the comments that we'll receive from interested parties are, keyed off your responses. Because, the issues that were raised by interested parties. You responded, and now we're back again. Guess I would ask, and Jonathan, is there any way you can turn that around so I can see who's on?
You can turn around.
Yeah, I did, like, I know it's behind me, but that's really awkward.
Oops, sorry. Shh, don't jinx me. I got it all wrapped up funny from earlier too. Can you see it now?
Yes.
You can move this a little closer. Let's do that.
So we have Mr. Banky. And we may have others who want to speak. I guess I would ask Mr. Banky if it would be more appropriate in your view, more helpful to you, if we started with Mr. Berry verbally presenting his information, or would you like to comment first? So let me ask you that question before we begin.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm open to either way.
Okay.
Bob made a good point. He wasn't able to answer or address anything. So I don't mind going first. If he'd like that, that's fine. I can do that. If you wish me to do that.
Well, if we're going to do it that way, I guess, other board members, please chime in here, but I guess given where we are right now, it feels to me like it would make more sense to let Mr. Berry verbally respond, and then follow that with your responses. And I do assume, Mr. Banky, that I know that some of the responses that were provided by Mainland were satisfactory to you. and that you didn't have any further questions about them, but there were some that you did. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and I'd like to thank Mainland for addressing all of the comments, one way or the other, and making the accommodations that prove satisfactory. I appreciate that.
Given that, why don't we start with Mr. Berry and give him an opportunity to verbally comment, and then we will get back to you, Mr. Benke, and others who might want to comment following that presentation.
Okay.
We'll set up the plans so that you guys can see where we're at with this. Because with the response in December came a few extra plans, or a few plans that we modified in order
Right.
to address some of those. And while some of them were, I think, final review items, if we were addressing plans anyway, we just cleaned it up.
Yeah, and that's fine, that's fine.
Thank you. In summary, we're still looking at a 9-lot subdivision with 8 proposed lots. Can you guys see okay? Sir, if you want to, you're welcome to come around. You can move it. Cool. All right. One of the changes was road names. There was a lot of discussion back and forth with me, John, with Chip and others at the town, trying to figure out how do we deal with this naming issue, and what I believe is now mutually agreed as a naming convention is all the existing roads, Lane Road, North Wayne Road, Manitoba Camp Road, none of those names change. Just keep them the same way they are now. And the new road is Juniper Lane, and Juniper Lane just comes in here and is that as well. It's all just Juniper Lane. So that was one of the changes on the plan. There were a number of other issues, and I'm gonna go down through. I'm going to be highlighting these, not in detail. If you want details, then boy, there's some great reading in that letter that I sent you. You guys can dig into your heart's content. But I'll try to do this at a high level. There are a couple of details I'm gonna have to dig into.
And assume that, everyone should have reviewed that letter at this point, so assume that has happened.
This response I'm gonna talk about right now is a response to both the first letter and the second letter combined. Because most of those issues were just continuations of the first letter. So I'm gonna try to address these, and hopefully we'll be on the same page. So, the first item is talking about scheduling, and I think we're there. The abutter requested a note on the plan, which we take no exception to. We'll add that note with the caveat that, and this is about the stream crossing, specifically about this stream crossing. It's the only stream we're crossing on the entire property. The road crosses it now. It's just the culvert's long gone. Brought it up. Gone, so I have to put in a new one. That's the street crossing we're talking about. And DEP has a window that you can do work in the stream bed to put in a culvert like that. And we're gonna comply with that window. The only exception that I would say to the agreement that we're just gonna do that is, and put the note where Mr. Benke asked, is that sometimes weather conditions allow earlier construction or later construction. You can do that with DEP's permission, and we're not, by agreeing, we're not saying that we won't ask for a waiver if in the middle of June, if that stream bed is dry as a bone, like it was when we went out and walked. And if it is, then there's no reason why we can't ask DEP for the waiver so that we can start working. So we just don't want to give that up, but otherwise, we're fine with it. We submitted a bunch of new drawings. The crux of these, of many of these issues is about stormwater and about what we submitted and whether it is correct, whether it is as required and meets the ordinance. I believe that it does. I'm here tonight to explain to you why I think that. And it has to do with the ordinance. In Mr. Menke's letter from last week, He actually quoted the ordinance for you, so if you have that letter, it's right in front of you. And it's a nuance of this. We've got, section 8, Article 8, section 10, which is about stormwater runoff. This is where I get in the weeds a little bit, guys. I'm sorry, I'm an engineer. It comes naturally to me to go into the weeds. So if you don't want to follow along, that's okay. You can just stop listening to me. That's what most of my staff does. There's 2 sections within that Article 8, section 10, stormwater runoff standard. There's an A.
Could I interrupt you
Sure.
for just a second?
Of course,
We
please.
made some changes this past year, and the numbers changed in that performance standard section a little bit. And so if anyone is looking for it, the stormwater section in Article 8 is on page 59, and it's currently labeled section 7.
Notice that online.
Which is wrong, but that's what it's labeled right now. So if you're having trouble looking for it, that's why.
Thank you. I did notice that online. And for a while, I was confused.
Yeah.
But I finally found a printout that I had done last year and found it. So, under Article 8, Section 10, or if you're looking at the online version, it's Section 7, stormwater runoff. There are 2 sections. There's an A and there's a B. And when we read this, of course, like a year ago now, prepping all this stuff, when we read this, it seemed pretty clear what the intent and the meaning of this was. Section A was about new construction and development. Section B were stormwater standards for land uses that require site review. Now, new construction and development could be interpreted to include everything. However, the language in this reads clearly to us that this is meant for smaller projects. Say someone's building a garage, and that garage needs to follow stormwater runoff standards. And Section A uses language that allows a code enforcement officer to deal with a landowner and get what's needed for stormwater runoff without being specific. I highlight words here such as all new construction development shall be designed to minimize stormwater runoff. And then it goes on, the next sentence says, where possible. This is language that allows a subjective interpretation of any particular site. And we see this commonly. This is not uncommon at all. So I guess I would ask, does the town require stamped engineered calculations and stormwater management plans when somebody builds a garage or a new driveway? And I would guess that they do not. I don't know what town that does. But when a project reaches a certain threshold, all of a sudden we've got to get very specific about what is required. And then we look at item B, stormwater standards for land uses that require site review. And I would make the argument, and in fact, that's how we interpret it, that, oh, we are a site plan review. This project is large enough to trigger an objective standard. And that objective standard is listed clearly under the stormwater standards for land uses that require site review, like this project. That is the one that we use. It's a higher standard, it's an objective standard, it's a definitive standard. That's the standard that we use. And that's the one I believe applies to this project.
I would point out too, just for planning board members, that there is a stormwater standard in the site review standards as well, that says pretty much the same thing. And that's on page 23 of the ordinance.
So I'm making the point here that when I reviewed this ordinance, and that when we submitted to you, we were we were proposing a project that required site review. And so we followed Article 8, Section 10, sub-item B, with those objective standards. That's what we did. We didn't seek to minimize stormwater runoff with Chapter 500 rules. That doesn't make any sense. That's not what the Chapter 500 rules say. We tried to use best management practices, good design practices, and the design of the site to meet item B. I don't believe item A applies here. That is my interpretation. I don't make the decision, of course. I'm sorry that lands on you. And we will do what you said, on this matter. But, unless the town is applying, a strict and strong stormwater standard requiring engineered standards provided by an engineer on every new construction and development, regardless of its size, I think it's fair that we interpreted this to say, hey, no, that the threshold is the site, whether it applies to site. So that was our take, and if I'm correct, if, I'm not dictating what the board has to do, I'm making an argument here, that's all. If that's correct, then many of these stormwater concerns fall away. We met the chapter 500 as required in Article 8, Section 10, subitem B. And then some. So that's the stormwater stuff. I'm not asking for a decision now, but I don't really prepared to do that right now. This is my presentation as a response to Mr. Menke's items, okay? Some of the more specific things, he talked to Mr. Green at DEP. I know Mr. Green at DEP, I've worked with him for decades. I talk to him on just about a weekly basis. Great guy, I like him, I know him, and I respect him. Unfortunately, his opinion on what the town ordinance says is not germane. That's not his call on what the ordinance says. I'm pretty sure that's your guys' call. So we're just gonna leave it at that. We agree that the planning board should require applicants to adhere to all applicable parts of the ordinance. I'm just making the argument that that piece is not applicable. Let's see, I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything in this discussion. Anything worth mentioning? No, I don't think so. I think I've got it. The abutter requested that you require post-development flow rates to meet pre-development flow rates. Unfortunately, that's not in your ordinance anywhere. The word in the actual ordinance that he quoted is not meet, it is minimize. So we are to minimize impacts, which we did. And then it also points out that Article 8, Section 10 requires these hydraulic calculations, and I'm saying that it does not. It requires us to reach chapter 500, which we did. So I just want to, that's the stormwater, the crux of my stormwater discussion.
Maybe it would be helpful if you could just briefly summarize in an earlier submission that this was the July 16th supplemental information that was submitted. There is a stormwater section here, and it talks about, you know, meeting the, you looked at 210, 25-year storm events, et cetera. It might be helpful if you could just summarize that piece so everyone can hear what you did in that regard.
Certainly. At a very high level, I'm not prepared to go into the details of all those calculations right now. But at a very high level, we did run a hydraulic stormwater analysis on the entire property and offsite areas. And it generally all flows down towards the old road. We did that pre-development, we did that post-development. We did it post-development so that we could show that our culverts are properly sized. We do that in-house. Just like the guy that designs your car, the guy or girl that designs your car, make sure that the engine is built right. But you don't get those calculations, they just did it as a background. That's what we did. We did background calculations to make sure that these are designed and sized properly. We did pre versus post, looking for, is there a problem here? Because if there's a problem, we don't require, or we won't wait for the board to tell us that there's a problem here, you need to fix it, right? Because I have to sleep at night. So we did that pre versus post to make sure it wasn't a problem. We said, oh, no, there's no problem here. We're good. That the summary that you were provided, sorry, point, it's a bad habit. The summary that's provided in your book was just that, a summary to show you that, yes, we did the work, everything's okay, we're good to go.
When you say post-development, you're talking about, when you did your stormwater calculations, it seemed like in terms of post-development, you came up with what you thought would be the impervious surface by driveways and houses, and what that added to the stormwater runoff. right?
Correct.
So when you say post-development, that's after the subdivision is built.
Absolutely.
It's not just your infrastructure, road and utility lines, it's
Yep.
and the DEP though, if they were looking at this, they wouldn't be considering the development of houses and driveways, right? They would only be looking at what you're doing.
If we had crossed a specific threshold for DEP, then they would require us to count everything. We are not at that threshold, we're not even close to that threshold. So no, the DEP work that we did and the permits that we have from DEP in hand right now do not count the development that might be on the lots. But that's not where we stopped. We included everything because everything's going to be there when those culverts have to flow water. So yes, we included the proposed roads, we included grading changes because of the road, and we included an assumed house impact area for driveway, house, garage, septic system, not just impervious, but also out the lawn, might there be, that sort of thing. It's pretty standard stormwater stuff that we have to do. I'm glad you asked the question because I can nerd out about it. But yeah, that's all in there. Your standards don't require us to show that to you. If we were a larger project, your standards would require us to submit all of that.
But you still have to minimize stormwater runoff.
We do have to minimize stormwater runoff. What does that mean? It goes on to talk about, hey, where possible, maybe we should have a pond, maybe we should allow water to infiltrate into the ground, which is interesting the way that's written because there's lots of ways to infiltrate water into the ground. And a pond is actually one of the mid ways to do it. There are better ways. I don't know how the record shows on the mid, but I'm so sorry to say that. I'm not the world's best presenter, but so we did some of that. There's a pond there and it will infiltrate water.
So the pond that was proposed, that was later in the process when the pond came up.
Yes.
And it's for the purpose of, it's a fire pond and it's a stormwater detention pond, correct? Does
It's
it
not
serve
much
both
of
of
a
those?
stormwater detention pond. Most of the water flows in and out at very close to the same flow rates, but it will hold the water, it will clean the water, and it will allow water to infiltrate into the ground. So that's the stormwater issue in I guess in a nutshell. I'm not asking you guys to just trust me on blind faith. I'm just simply saying we complied with the ordinance. That's all I'm saying. That's what I feel that I have done. Should I go on to any other issue? If you want to talk about stormwater?
Does anybody have,
I
Don?
just wanted to follow up. So the fire pond is a fire pond as opposed to a stormwater management structure. Is that correct?
Oh, it's both. It's both. It's still a stormwater management structure because it's still holding water. It's still allowing water to settle. Solids, suspended solids will have time. It comes in one side, it goes out the other. So there's plenty of time now for water for the solids to drop out. And it's a cleaning treatment method that DEP allows.
You've got I saw you have a spillway there.
Yeah.
Designed to, so which makes sense, obviously.
Yeah. Sometimes people, I've seen designs where a fire pond is just a hole in the ground. And I've seen those, there's nothing wrong with those, except that I like to know that it's not refilled. And by running stormwater through it, now I know it refills. So there's fire water available when needed.
So is stormwater directed to the fire pond?
Yes,
And then from the fire pond, where does it go?
it'll go out, point the things here, water from this area goes this way, water that's coming down through here along the ditches and the road goes this way, it comes down into the fire pond, which is that little oval shape right there. And then on the other side, there's a channel that goes down to a level spreader there where it spreads the water out and releases it as close to an existing locations as we can get.
On your property?
On lot 2 with easements shown on the plan.
Do you have an idea how many gallons are in that pond?
Tanner, do you know how many gallons are in that well?
That's a good question. I should know that, and I don't, sorry.
Not off the top of my head. We'll have to get back to you on that. I think
you said in there the size of the pole.
I think I did. I wanna say that they wanted 10,000 gallons. Is that right?
I'm not sure you went back and forth with the chief on that. so-
We did. Can I get back to you on that question? It's a great question. I just don't have an answer for you right now. It was designed to have the gallonage required by the chief. I can tell you that. And when we do that, we don't count the bottom 2 feet because all those solids that I mentioned, they settle out. So eventually it doesn't have that anymore. And it doesn't count the top 2 feet.
And you guys are you're putting in the dry hydrant?
Yeah.
Ron, did you have?
I'm sorry.
Well, I was just looking at where the spread of, so that's pretty close to Bucharest Lane ends, right, at the, where it turns right. So that's the old road.
Yeah. Were you on the sidewalk?
Yeah.
Yes, we won't go all the way down to this point. The low spur is about 300 feet down the road.
So would you say that because of what you're doing, that the amount of stormwater runoff is less than what is naturally occurring now?
Are you asking about post-development and pre-development?
Right.
No, I didn't say that. But we're talking about flow rates, not volumes. So when you don't look at flow rates, there's a certain threshold where, threshold is a bad word, how do I say this? There's a certain point where like, well, how much more is it? And if it's only a little bit more, that's not a concern, because what we're modeling here is rainfall, Mother Nature, and the perfect 24-hour storm curve with preset rainfall rates that never actually land exactly like that anyway. So if it's a 1 or 2% increase, I just count, okay, a 10% increase, I'm not concerned about that. If I see a 50% increase, now I'm like, oh, I don't care what the code says, we gotta do something. So little rates increases, that's hard to help that when you change the landscape. When you take forested area and you turn it to lawn and driveways of homes, it will increase the flow rate. There's no question about that. But I didn't see anything in there that was concerning to me. And I looked those numbers over first.
So am I reading this correctly? There's a little table in here and drainage summary table. Storm event, 2-year, 10-year, 25-year, pre-development, post-development. And in each case, there is a slight decrease. And then later on in that section, it says 2 locations experience a slight increase in flow post-development. And let's see, the first, the proposed stream crossing, and then the second, it talks about a culvert. And those are the only 2 locations where there's an increase, is that correct?
No, those numbers that he gave you were project-wide. There are areas that have a little increase and there are areas that have a little decrease. And then we have identified 4 different areas that I looked at when I reviewed the model myself. And Mr. Benke actually identified some of these as well. Collet, outlet, and there's a stretch of road in here that we wanted to look at too.
So all 4 of those have a slight increase?
No, some of them had a decrease, some of them had an increase.
So this is accurate, there are only 2 locations with an increase?
I would, yeah, I'd have to review that in more detail to answer that question that specifically. And so, because what happens is some of them might have an increase because, not because we did a lot of work in there, but because we moved subcatchment over a little bit when the road got built. We're catching some water, we're shuffling it over to a different direction. So do we look at the whole site? Do we look at each spot? I think the answer is yes. We looked at both of those. Just trying to meet your ordinance But if you have requests for information, I'm all ears.
It was, I think it was mentioned in the bylaws about, maintaining some wooded area along property lines. But that homeowners are expected to maintain the wooded area. I'm just wondering whether, if there was more wooded area between lots, less grass, smaller building envelope, whether you would reduce stormwater.
You raised like 5 points there for me to think about. They're all jumbling in my head, and I don't do that well. So I'm gonna try to help here. Increasing setbacks reduces building envelope, which reduces what a lot buyer can do on their property, which I would not be a proponent of, so I'm not suggesting that. But when you do have wooded areas in between, when one lot flows off stormwater towards another lot, you end up with a buffer effect where the stormwater has to flow through that buffer. And by the way, none of our models even account for that as a quality treatment, as a infiltration treatment. Stormwater modeling is very, very much high level and assumptions based. And we don't go in and model every little strip of woods between lots as an example. So, John, I don't remember a wooded requirement between houses.
I don't think there was one, no.
Okay.
No, I don't recall it either.
That was in the bylaws.
The deed restrictions or?
Well, I'll find it.
Okay, while you're talking about bylaws, I do want to mention that I made a mistake. We had submitted homeowners association documents. That got revised, we submitted a road association document, and that road association document was to be in lieu of the homeowners association. All of the common infrastructure that needs to be maintained would be maintained by the road association anyway. So there's no need to have a homeowners association and a road association. We're gonna do just the road association. So you have a homeowners association in one of your earlier packets that is now moved. So I apologize, and I believe Mr. Benke corrected me on that, he was correct to do so. I did not say that should not be reviewed. Not being proposed. Those are some good stormwater questions. Anybody want to hit me with some more? I love it. It's like, this is great.
More stormwater questions? Anybody?
I'm not saying no to anything, folks.
The way you
Really have a
present,
question back up.
Okay.
Now, hold on just a minute, I'll get to you.
Thanks. The way you presented your thoughts about the stormwater ordinance, appreciate your opinion. I guess I have a question. The way you presented it, I sort of felt like you viewed A and B, if that makes sense, right? The A and B section, you were viewing them sort of in conflict to each other, like one did not apply and one applied. I'm just wondering if I'm interpreting your opinion correctly.
That is my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, when you look at the language, they are a little bit in conflict. One might say minimize, but depending on the project size, we might have to meet. One might say, if possible, and the other might say, no, you have to. So those are a little bit in conflict.
Okay. So it's your opinion.
In my opinion,
So
that's just my opinion. My opinion doesn't matter. It's your opinion that matters, so.
So in that section, you feel like it's an or, not an and.
And it doesn't say or, but it doesn't say and either. So I was,
Just asking, just clarify.
no, that's my opinion.
Yeah, thanks.
My opinion is that A is the policy goal, the goals, and B is the standard. That we refer to.
Okay.
I don't think it matters.
There's other items here, but I'll continue to answer stormwater questions. I think this gentleman over here is.
Yeah, is it about stormwater?
Yeah, I had just a question about the terms he was using.
Yeah, okay, so before we move on from stormwater, I'd be happy to take you out of order if you could give us your name.
It doesn't matter.
No, go ahead while we're doing some.
It's just some of the terminology I have concern about.
And could you give us your name for the?
I'm Warren Norris. I live in Manitoba on Manitoba Camp Road. I've been a permanent resident there for 8 years. So most of my conversation is going to be anecdotal because I live there and have gotten to see stormwater on a seasonal basis. You were using words like the pond will infiltrate water. You say what goes in comes out. I don't know that because you just told us also that we don't have an opportunity to see how we arrive at those calculations with the gallons in, gallons out. You said it's not a standard, so you don't have to comply with that. I have a problem with that because he's also using words like slight increase. Well, I say it's an inundation when it's a slight increase because we have a lot of water coming through there seasonally. And I don't know what this subdivision is going to do because he said something about the water coming through here goes onto their property, goes on to the next subdivision. And I live down here, right in the way. So I'd like to have those addressed somehow in terms of volume or don't use words like slight when maybe inundation might be more appropriate. This is my comment.
Thank you for that.
The Sherman Mountain Top, everybody was down on the side. So I can't stop the stormwater from crossing anybody's things. No one can. So I'm not trying to minimize his concerns. His concerns are valid. I'm glad he's here. Thank you for coming tonight. That's, it's a weird thing, that's totally fine. So.
All right, any other stormwater questions
I
from
don't know,
ladies?
that's the next
Jack?
one. To the extent that stormwater leaves the site, leaves your property. When we did the site visit, the property down from there, it's all wooded and is apparently supposed to remain forever wooded or undeveloped. So I know you can't really use I guess you can't use their property for stormwater management, but I wonder how water would I mean, that's a pretty far distance to travel from your property down to where the houses are in Camp Manitoba. So how do you figure that? Does that come into play at all? That there's this buffer of wooded area?
It comes into play in that when water flows through forested areas, it is slowed down, it is cleaned, it is infiltrated. And in fact, Maine DEP is one of their best management practices, uses wooded buffers like what's across the road as a best management practice to treat stormwater. So it does all of that, and it will continue to do all of that. When it comes to our stormwater model, I can't take it into account because it's not our land. It's downstream and it's not ours. So I have to look at everything at the bottom of the subdivision, right there. I have looked at downstream areas in cases where, like, say there was a bridge. And so the question is, oh, does the stormwater change what happens at the bridge, that type of thing. But not into a forested area that's extremely likely to stay forested forever. In short, it's not anything that I have concerns about. Clearly, some of the abutters do, and that's okay.
Anybody else stormwater?
Oh,
Hey.
I'll just ask you a question because the neighbor who throughout the term inundation, and I think one of the things that we're seeing is we're getting a lot of extreme storm events. Your system isn't really designed for extreme storm events, there will be inundation during extreme storm events. It would be my expectation. And so that, but it's not what you're designing for. I guess that's, throw that out. It's fair comment about that.
I would, I agree with you. There will be an extreme storm event. There will be eventually a storm event that causes erosion damage, culverts to wash out, and roads to collapse. That can and will happen. I'm from the town of Jay, and if you guys remember what happened in Jay in June of 2023, you know what I'm talking about. Some of those roads just got fixed this past couple of months. So, yeah, it can and it will. The standard of care, how big do you make the infrastructure and what do you design for is well established. And typically that's a 25-year storm event. We run our models with a 100-year storm event to see what happens and make sure that it won't cause an erosion event across the road and create a hazard, because I don't want anyone getting hurt. Invariably, those things happen at night. They happen in bad driving conditions, and people can't see the washout before they get there. As engineers, we were all told, now I feel like I'm preaching a little bit, I'm sorry about that. But as engineers, we were all told in college that you'll be lucky if you get out of your career without killing somebody. And it sounds horrible and terrible, but if we mess up a culvert design and it washes out and then grandma drives into it at night, that's a problem, right? But we have to stop that somewhere. We can't design for the 500, the 1,000. Well, correction, we can, but nobody does. But that could happen at any time. We could get a 1,000-year storm event tonight. There's nothing stopping that. These 100-year storm events, it's not a one storm that will happen in 100 years. They call it a 100-year storm event, but it's actually a 1% chance of happening in any given year.
And I also don't have it all up being a requirement in our business.
What's that?
Where you would design into that.
The 100-year?
Yeah.
Yeah. We just do it because we want to sleep at night.
Yeah, so I don't know why we're pushing you to a standard that might not be in the land use law, definitely not the land use law.
Well, I don't know, I'm not sure it is, but.
I don't think
but
anyone's
do
pushing
think-
for 100-year standards, is a question, is I.
Right, I just wanted to have it out on the public record.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Okay, planning board members, anything further? Stormwater? Okay. So we'll let you proceed and then we'll get to Mr. Benke and others.
I'll try to be
following-
as quick
following
and
your-
high level as possible. That was the meat of the conversation, so hopefully I can go a little quicker. I do want to talk about well water. Mr. Benke and others took steps to correct the plan issue. Thank you for that. That was really good. They did have a lot of questions about our work, and some of it was a little offensive to me, I'll be honest, but I will address that here as best I can. First of all, that work for wells, it was provided by a licensed main engineer / certified geologist / licensed site evaluator with pushing 40 years of experience. This guy knows what he's doing. So I would defend him against any talk that he didn't know what he was doing. So I just want to put that out there. The main issue here seems to be a misunderstanding on the scope of what the study is and what it was for. As I understand it, we have to prove, when it comes to well water, we have to prove two things according to ordinance to you. We have to show you these things. The first one is that there is a sufficient and healthful supply of water for the home buyers, the builders, the people that are gonna live there. And that's what Mr. Dixon's letter was meant to answer. That there is a healthful supply of water. That standard is not drilling all the wells in advance, testing all the water and showing the results to you, because we don't know where the homeowners are gonna want to drill the wells. The standard, our intention was to meet the standard with his notification that, hey, there are other wells in the area that produce enough water to supply a single family home. And there's no reason to believe that would be here. From the opinion of a certified geologist with almost 40 years of experience. One of the smartest guys I know. So, I feel like that's what the intent of that was. The intent was not, of his letter, the intent was not to show that when we use water out for those 8 homes, that it was gonna have a detrimental effect on an abutter. That's not what the point of that was. The point, the concern of the abutters, that our wells here could have an effect on wells down here, understandable. And you do have a standard that says we're not supposed to have any impacts on the abutters that are unreasonable. And while the ordinance doesn't specifically say that well water is one of those impacts, if you think it does, I would agree with you. Right, I wouldn't want to have put a well on my land that then impacts someone else to the point where they don't have, it's an unreasonable impact, now they don't have a healthful water supply. That's not cool. So to show that, we provided a rain budget, it's a rainfall budget. We're showing that some 5.6 million gallons of water will infiltrate on our site on any given year. But we're only using like 800 and something thousand. So it's almost a factor of magnitude more rainfall infiltrating on our site than we're pulling out of the ground. Mr. Banky made a lot of comments about how it's much more complicated than that, and I agree. I can't stand here and tell you that one of those wells won't have an impact on a neighbor. Anybody can drill a well and have an impact, an unreasonable impact on a neighbor. Anybody can do that. And I haven't talked in a while, so I guess it was all right. Like Goodwin Well and Water, and he would tell me some horror stories of drilling a well, and the landowner there has a friend across town that says, hey, weren't you drilling a well today? And he's like, yeah, well, my well just went dry. And he's like, it's 8 miles away, it can't possibly have affected. But they wanted to prove it, so they put a dye in the well that they just drilled. And sure enough, it showed up 8 miles away at someone else's well. That's more than a town away. That's like drilling a well here at the town office and finding out that it impacted the town garage in Fayette. That's actually, it's probably quite a bit further than that, right? Livermore Falls. It doesn't make any sense, but fractured bedrocks are far more complicated than this issue. So I can't tell you that won't happen, but that's no reason to not drill wells, and it's no reason to make that the standard. Nobody, no matter how much money you spend on a hydrological study, can prove that one well won't impact another. You don't know until you drill. That's when you find out for sure. What we can do is do a rainfall budget, which is the typical standard that most planning boards might want to hear about, and rarely ask unless it's a very dense project, that we are actually using less water than our site produces. Because the reality is, a well there is probably not using water from this area. They might be using water from someplace over there, and then the well that's 50 feet away is using water from water that lands way up there. That's very common. That's how wells work. Bedrock fracture wells. I'm not talking about dug wells or aquifer wells. I'm talking about bedrock fracture wells, which is what most of us have in Maine. We're very blessed in Maine. We've got lots of fresh water in our bedrock. If this was Idaho, it'd be a completely different discussion. So we provided answers to both of those standards. We believe there's plenty of fresh water. We showed it. We don't believe that this project will have an impact on a neighboring well, and we showed it. Can we definitively answer that? No. We think no one can. It's just not possible. No one can. A third-party, more intensive hydrological study usually is required when you have more water being drawn from the ground on your site than your site infiltrates. These are usually municipal wells, and they're usually commercial wells, like Poland Springs and those sorts of outfits. Mostly municipal wells, because there's far more of those. There might be a case where you have a small site with a multifamily development that has 50 families and on a 2-acre parcel, okay, let's talk. But 8 families on full 50 acres there, it's obvious and mathematically shown that we contribute more water to the ground than we're drawing. Further, we're not actually drawing it and leaving it out. The septic system, so that water goes back into the ground right there, right where it would have landed anyway. Treated by a state-approved design method to treat the wastewater before it goes back into the ground. So we're not actually drawing and removing any water from the ground permanently, except maybe what someone drinks and then hauls offsite. So
Was there any suggestion that you were going to do a hydrogeologic study? I mean, I don't remember having that conversation.
the board did not request that.
No, I don't
The
think
board
that's-
requested me to
I think
respond
I think
to
that's
Frank's
unreasonable.
comments,
My-
and his comments did.
Okay, I'm sorry, just clarifying that
Yeah.
because you mentioned it. And then there's nothing, these are just standard residential lots, assumedly with one well, fairly typical flow rates that the homeowner would expect. There's nothing abnormal, and there's no significant other.
No, there's no water draw. These are around 270 gallons a day.
Got it.
Like an average 3-bedroom household.
Yep.
I'll move on. I won't belabor that point, even though I was passionate about it. Sorry about that. Hope that didn't leak out too much. Let's see. Oh, let's go on to some of the comments about IFW and botanical features. Is that okay with you? Awesome. DIFW, he makes when I say he, I am referring to the abutters that I'm responding to their comments. So I don't mean to be I hope I'm not offending anybody. Made some comments that, hey, IFW required 100 feet, and it must be a good reason for that. And there is, in IFW's eyes. IFW wants to see 100 feet in front of every stream. They made a case for that when the law was first enacted back in 1990 something. That and I'm old enough to remember that. So they wanted 100 feet, and Chip's like, shut up. Sorry, Chip, I didn't mean to offend anybody, but they wanted 100 feet then, but and IFW has good reasons for why they want 100 feet. It's not specific to the site though, it's general. They require a request 100 feet on every stream. They do not require it. They recommend. That's what the letter says. It says we recommend 100 feet. They recommend 100 feet on every stream, everywhere, all the time. But that's not what the law says, because the legislature understood there was more concerns than just IF&Ws. There's landowner rights. There are housing complexes that need to be built. There are good and profitable uses of land. There's economics. There's goodness, the list goes on forever. And they balanced all of those, and they made it 75 feet. IF&W can recommend 100 feet on every stream should they choose, but that's not what the law says. So we are, because they have one topic. It's an important topic. It's an important concern. I'll be the first one to say it's an important concern. But it's only one. We have to balance all the concerns. That's why the law says 75. So that helps that. I don't know if anyone has any questions on that. Should I move on or?
I have questions on phone, please, but I can.
Yeah, any questions about the 75-foot buffer issue? No. Go
Okay.
on.
A very similar discussion about botanical features. The abutter requests a on the ground field study for botanical features. They can do that. They can ask for it. In fact, the language that they use says, you may want to. That's what her letter actually says. You may want to do some field work. Of course they can say that because they want more information for the databases. They can ask us to do it all the time. But there is a rule and a process in place on purpose for reasons. And it's not just the potentially rare botanical species on the site. So what is extremely standard, and I suspect Readfield has done since time immemorial about botanical features on the ground. If the first thing you do is you check to see if there's anything that's been found there before, botanical databases that show this area could have a certain rare botanical species. And if that database says no, usually it's right where it stops. Because otherwise, everybody would have to go out and do this. The databases said no, they didn't have anything shown. The abutter mentioned that there was one 4 miles away. 4 miles away is in another town. It's not close. It's not like this site is singled out for potential for rare botanical species. There's a rule of process on purpose. That's one concern that MNAP has. It's an important concern. It's something worth having a process for. Absolutely, but it's one concern among many. And so we met that standard, we believe, when we submitted to you their letter that shows that their databases show no potential significance for botanical species there. Similarly with the spring salamander, the abutter mentions that it doesn't make any sense that you did this in the winter. Of course, we did it in the winter because that's when we had the time to do it. That's when the application was coming in. We didn't do it in the winter. Besides, it was January, it was early January, and it was one of those years like we've had recently where early January, there was no snow. So, or very little snow. We were able to go out and do that, no problem. The state and the DEP website sounds like it requires us to do that during certain summer months. But that's not what the actual guidelines say. The guidelines say they recommend doing it during certain months. But the guidelines allow us to do it any time of year, and in fact, we've been doing it any time of year for a while.
Can you just, I'm just curious.
Sure.
I'd like to hear from you how one does a spring salamander survey in January. I mean, what would one actually do?
So a northern spring salamander is, of course, a little critter that lives under cobbles. Typically, you need larger boulders. And thank goodness I talked to my scientist today, because this isn't something that's in my bailiwick, but I did ask him specifically, because I thought someone might ask. You have to have a stream with cobbles, not gravel, not little rocks, but bigger rocks, brick size, something like that. And they tend to crawl in underneath there. And so what they do, they literally walk up the stream, and there's a process where every so often you have to flip one over. You have to do it carefully, because if there's one over there, you don't want to smush it. Right, so they pick it up and they look. So in January, the water's, it's not frozen. The water is running in the stream bed. You can flip those over in January just as much as you can in June or July or any other time of year. And in fact, if we'd gone and done it in July, there probably wouldn't have been any water. And we probably would have said, well, this passes, like, there's no water here.
So they're just as likely to be there in January as they are
Yeah, they don't go,
in
yeah.
April and May. That's
Yeah.
where they hang out all
That's,
year.
to my understanding, yes. And when I say my understanding, I'm saying that specifically because nobody knows. What happens when somebody says, well, we think these things are rare, the state does a little bit of a study. Yeah, maybe they are rare, but then they don't know what to do because they don't have the budget to go out and poke around in every stream in the state of Maine. So what they do is they say, let's call this threatened. And so then when anyone wants to do anything on their property, they have to do a study. And it turns out that they're not as threatened as they thought, and I anticipate that by the end of the year or two from now, they'll be taken off the list. They'll be like, oh, those weren't threatened, sorry. But regardless, we did go out there and look. The stream was not conducive to spring salamander habitat. What few cobbles we found and flipped did not have any.
I got 10 in my house if you need some.
You got what's that?
I got 10 of them in my house if you need some.
You do? Living in a terrarium?
Yeah.
When did you do a site evaluation for vernal pools?
When we was out there looking at wetlands and mapping wetlands. That was not in January. That was during the summertime.
Do we have that report?
Yep, it was as part of
No,
your
it's-
package. It is a report that specifically says no potential vernal pools
It's
found.
in here.
And when it was done?
I don't know if it specifically states the date. So vernal pools, if you want, should I expound on that for just a very brief
Yes,
amount of
please
time?
go ahead.
Okay, so vernal pools, for something to qualify as a vernal pool, you have to be there during certain dates from, it's usually early May to June. That date varies, depending on where you are in Maine. The further north you are, the later in the year it is, the further south you are, you go a little earlier in the year. But there's a narrow window when you can determine something is a vernal pool. You can determine something's not a vernal pool any time of year. So you have to have a certain channel, you can't have, it can't be part of a stream, so you can't have water flowing in and out of it. It has to hold water during a certain time frame. And if it violates any of those, not a vernal pool. If we're there outside the window and we think, well, that might be a vernal pool, we are required to flag it, call it a potential vernal pool, and then we have to come back during the window, which makes our wetland scientists very busy.
So, wait, you determine that whether there may be a vernal pool at any time of the year? Like, what, I mean, you're supposed to, according to inland fish and wildlife, you're supposed to go between April 25th and May 25th.
To determine if it is a vernal pool.
To determine if there are egg rashes in the vernal pool.
But it requires a basin, it requires not being part of a stream network, and it requires several other things that I'm not scientific enough to answer for you, but I can bring some in if you want me to. And if those are not present, then there can't be a vernal pool there.
But you have to look for that in the springtime.
No, you can look for that at any time of year, as long as you can see the ground.
Well, if snow falls in a ditch and it's ice, what do you do? What do you do? How do you know whether it's a vernal pool or not?
Well, if it's a ditch, it's not a vernal pool. If it's man-made, it's not a vernal pool. According to DEQ. And if there's too much snow, you can't tell. And if there's too much snow, you can't see the ground well enough. But if you can see the ground, you can determine that, hey, there's no pool there.
So
If it's sloped and there's no pool there, there's just no vernal pool.
where does it say when you did the site review?
It's in one of the.
I'm
reports.
looking, because I just saw
Yeah.
that recently, and I'm not
I
putting my
think,
hands on
I
it.
believe this report is dated April. I do not know what date it was that they actually went out and looked for that stuff. But the report states no potential vernal pool for fact. Meaning that there wasn't anything that would qualify as a vernal pool regardless of what time of year it is. I'm not sure I'm being.
I don't know, I just don't know if I agree with you that you can determine whether there's potential vernal pool at any time of the year. Whether you have to look at certain times of the year.
Okay, I'm telling you that you can.
Okay.
But you don't have to agree with me, you can look it up or ask for more information, I can bring a scientist, and or, bring in the specific rules and go over them in detail if you'd like. But you need a pool, you need, a pool that doesn't have flowing water, and if you don't have that as a geometric shape, then you can't have a vernal pool.
Did you comply with the vernal pool requirements in the application?
Yes.
Okay, what's the question?
Whether it's accurate.
How are you gonna confirm that? Can you go back to the people that did it?
Well,
Because he put it in his report. It complies with.
we don't have to accept it though.
Yeah.
We
So
have
are we gonna do that for every report? We're gonna go back to the person.
No,
who wrote it?
I've asked, what time of year was this done?
A reasonable question.
Okay.
I don't agree that you can do it in January when the ground is frozen.
So did somebody submit a fraudulent document to us?
Not fraudulent, just they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Maybe, I'm just saying maybe.
I can promise you that we did what we're supposed to do. However, it is on me to prove it, and I will prove it for you. I'll get that date for you, okay?
I know I saw a
Well,
piece in one of
yeah.
the submissions that addressed vernal pools, and I thought I could find it, and I
Well,
can't, so if you could identify that for us.
There's the reference I can find, which isn't, I'm sure the original is from a May 5, 2024 letter, item 4. The chip from you, which says, refers to, I still find it hard to believe that there are picture, sorry, that's Mr. Benke, that's it, sorry. So he does refer, now, Mr. Benke refers to Hunter Dalton, was he your?
Hunter Dalton is a mainland employee and a wetland scientist.
And Mr. Benke said, that is beyond my expertise, we will have to trust the judgment of Mr. Hunter Dalton.
Hunter Dalton's been trained to find vernal pools. Hunter Dalton has looked me in the eye and said, Bob, I can't tell right now, there's too much snow. And I say, okay, we go back later. So I am confident that it was done right. I'll have to earn your trust.
Is a wetland scientist licensed in the state of Maine?
No, as a point of fact, wetland scientists are not licensed in the state of Maine. The Maine Association of Site Evaluators and Maine Association of Wetland Scientists, there is an association of wetland scientists, have been trying to get a certification for quite some time. There isn't. But what happens is, if you want to be a wetland scientist in Maine, you typically take the Army Corps of Engineers in New Hampshire. They have a wetland class, a program that you go through, and he's been through that program. I have not. No, I don't want to.
Thank you.
Maybe I'm
Oh, we'll find it.
completely unsuccessful in finding that
Yeah.
piece I saw, so maybe you could identify that for us.
I will. I went through the application materials this afternoon to refresh myself on everything. I saw it. I know it's in there. We'll find that for you. And sir, we'll get a date for you. Okay? He has that.
It does say that Mainland did it in 2016. Vernal pool delineation was previously performed and completed by Mainland Development in 2016. But I don't
That's
know,
when
I
we
don't know when it
initially-
was done. So maybe you can find out when exactly it was done and give us the report.
We will get you what information we have. Yep. I think that's a fair request, Jack. I'm ashamed that I can't remember that detail right now. There were a few more things, Madam Chairman. you wanna
Okay, please.
Skim through those.
Yeah.
We talked about the
Briefly.
homeowners association, we talked about the road association. The road association, has been submitted, that is for Juniper Lane. Mr. Benke, suggested a separate road association for this piece of Manitowoc Camp Road, the shared piece of Manitowoc Camp Road, from Lane Road to Juniper Lane. He suggested that in a letter dated back in November. The applicant has reviewed that, has thought about it, and agrees. So, my client has already requested his attorney to draft up a starting language for a road association to cover that stretch of Manitowoc Camp Road, so that it will be mutually run by anyone who uses it and paid for by the people who use it. And so that's in the works. I believe that to be a final plan review item, not a preliminary plan review item. But we are working in good faith to try and make that happen. Utilities, he mentions, that he, as in, the abutter mentions, on the utilities that, that the planning board needs to decide whether they're underground or overhead. He's right, the ordinance, gives the option of overhead or underground, but they don't give that option to the landowner. The ordinance gives that option to you. So you can tell us, we prefer overhead, everything around the area is overhead. We think it fits in with the typical rural character there, so that's what we, the decision will, of course.
What's, I have to ask, since we have the discretion, what would be the cost increment in underground?
I don't have a number for you, but it's significant. It's much cheaper to run poles, overhead.
But any even estimate as to how much more it would cost, percentage wise?
Oh, rough, really, really rough. It might be, let's see, 1,000, 1,500, 300 feet. It might be, $5 to $10 a foot overhead. And it's probably gonna be $70 to $80 a foot underground. Because of the trenches and the economies. It's significantly more expensive. I like underground power, don't get me wrong, I really do, but I don't think it's necessary here, that's my opinion. Goodness, I think.
Are you, I can't remember, are you guys building the houses for this too, or are you just selling?
Just so. And I think, Madam Chair, I think. One other last thing, the butter mentioned, hey, this road needs to be brought up to, road standards, town road standards for private roads. The appendix A he refers to. That was our intent. I apologize, I didn't say that clearly enough. Of course, at any road that's gonna be seeing traffic from this, any private road, we're gonna we have to bring that up to standard, so we don't take any exceptions to that. I think that covers the items. There's a lot. I'm sorry. I feel like I just dominated this meeting for the last hour, so I'm really
No,
sorry.
thank you for that information. Are there any other questions for Mr. Barry right now? Jack?
Where are the wetlands that are mentioned?
The wetlands on the plan, they're shown here, it's shown on the plan with these little swampy symbols. So you have along this northern edge here, down around, it's not northern edge, it's north of the plant up, but along this backside, then there's a little channel of wetlands there, and there's the wetlands over in this corner here, there's a little pocket right there.
So somebody buys that lot and wants to build a house, would there have to be a setback for the wetlands? 75 feet.
I don't believe there is a setback from
They're
wetlands.
forested, correct?
Because they're just forested
Yeah.
wetlands, they're not actually freshwater wetlands, which would be, things like emergent shrub brush, or swampy, or in the shoreline zone. Shoreline zone wetlands are different usually for most towns. But here, I don't believe there is a setback to the wetlands. Chip, correct me if I'm wrong, please. He's like, oh,
That was part of Mr. Dole's presentation, April 22nd, it's in the material.
Okay.
Madam, I don't know if it would be helpful if you wanted the response, the written response to everything I just talked about from Mr. Banky's letter from last week is right here. I just finished this afternoon, so I didn't submit it beforehand. I don't know if you want it now, or just want me to mail it.
Okay, so this is a response to what exactly? I mean, we have, that's different from the December 18th response.
Yes,
Okay.
this is a response to the January 17th letter from Mr. Banky. I wasn't able to get it done in time to submit ahead of time. If you want it, I can hand it to you right now, Chip, or I can just.
Yeah. That would be fine.
Thank you. Oops, I think hey, it's yours now.
Okay, thank you very much. Good information. We appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to others. Mr. Banky, if you would like to present now, that would be great.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to comment. Mark Benke, 168 Manitoma Camp Road. I'm currently the president for the Manitoma Homeowners Association, and I am speaking on behalf of our association, which is abutters to this project. And I think I'm probably going to go work our way backwards and start with what we just ended with, which was the road. So if I understood it correctly, it is the intention of the developer and the designer to upgrade the shared section of Manitoma Camp Road, which is like the first 400 feet of Manitoma Camp Road. If my understanding is correct in that's great. Thank you very much. We're just gonna need to make sure that the plans are revised to incorporate that, because I'm not exactly sure what we have, but I know it doesn't meet, that section does not meet town standards, so I'm not exactly sure what all it entail. But appreciate addressing that issue. The road association, yes, we are in conversation with Lovejoy Ventures, the developers, on forming a road association that will include us on the first shared section of Manitoma Camp Road. As Bob from Mainland mentioned, they did form one for Juniper Lane only, so that's a different one. So it sounds like there's going to be two road associations with this, since we only go the first 425 feet or so. And I would like to take a moment to thank Bob for taking the time this past week to address my letter from January 17th. I'm sure that was very time consuming, and I appreciate everything that he did with that. So thank you, Bob. Going on the road naming, we're kind of the opinion, whatever E911 needs to do, that'll be what it is. So we defer to that as far as number of, the naming of the road. In regards to environmental concerns, where do I start with that? Okay, I'll just start with the botanical features well, let me start off by saying that we as humans on this planet are responsible as stewards for making sure that we are good stewards of the environment and can do everything in our power to keep our natural resources intact to the greatest extent possible. Uh, with the botanical features, I know the mention was 4 miles away is a long way. Uh, it's really not when you consider how pollinators pollinate and how pollen moves from one to another. 4 miles is not that far, so it is quite possible that we do have some rare and exemplary botanical features on that site. And yeah, that site's not been mapped or not been studied, and I'm sure all the environmentalists would love to have the whole state of Maine mapped. But it's not, I'm not asking this to add extra costs to the developer to do it. I'm asking it as just being good stewards of the environment. And the same with the spring salamander survey is, if it's allowed to be done all year round, great, but I hadn't seen anything that allows that. And so that was our concern on that one. As far as the vegetative buffer, I can understand where, yeah, they'll request 100 foot every time, but the law says 75. I was just curious as to know if the planning board would take the recommended 100 feet or if they're going to stick with the law of 75 feet. That was just something that was read in all these submittals and all the environmental reviews that were going on. As far as the wells go, I wasn't asking, or we weren't, let me say, the association was not asking for him to drill wells and find the flow rates and everything. It is a tricky proposition when you get to fractured bedrock, and I think Bob made the point very well that, wells nearby can be affected, wells away can be affected. And our concern is that his hydrogeologist, in the map that was shown, just by looking at it, for me as a layperson, I could see that there were house sites that weren't identified that had wells. And with Mr. Lawrence, one of the developers of Lovejoy Ventures, is also a member of our association, is very familiar with our community well, which is just down the street, a couple 100 feet, and that serves 22 people. And when you're looking at that map and you take that into consideration and the fact that one of our members' well he's having problems with his well, he's drilling a new well this winter to kind of resolve that issue. That issue was known by the developer, so I do believe that that should have been incorporated and included in the decision making, and whether that affected the decision making or not, I don't know. I'm not asking for a full-blown hydrological study of everything. I just wanted to make sure that the number of wells that were left off, which were about 2/3, would be considered and made sure that that doesn't change the position of effect of the new wells going into service with this new subdivision. And I do want to apologize for last September's meeting of passing out a plan that had mainland's title block on it. That was an inadvertent mistake of leaving that on there. And please, it was only handed out and distributed to the planning board members. If you guys could please destroy that, because having that out there adds confusion, and for all the same reasons that mainland submitted in their reply to my reply, it needs to be destroyed and removed. So if you could please do that, I would appreciate that. I know all of our copies that I've had electronically and on paper have been destroyed. So I don't have anything there with that. But that still doesn't change the fact that, about 2/3 of the wells that are within the area that could be affected didn't seem to be accounted for. And that's all we're stating is asking for a third independent party to just to review it and see if that's still the case that, that it's still acceptable to have these wells, given the fact we've got the community well, we've got one that's going bad, and that all the surrounding areas with their draws. I mean, the whole argument about rainfall and infiltration with septic, it takes years for it to get down to the aquifers that we're doing. So yeah, all this infiltration will happen, but in reality, we're taking water out faster than it replenishes those aquifers. That's just the reality, and it's hard to explain and describe, but I think Bob did a pretty good explanation of how the interconnection works and such like that. I'm not a hydrogeologist, but I kind of figured out how that worked by just listening to him and reading what he had, and I could see it work that, yeah, all these wells could be affected. So we just want to make sure that the statement's appropriate for given all of the wells that are surrounding it.
Excuse me, Mark, do you know, the date that you submitted that map with the mainland block on it?
That was passed out at the September Planning Board meeting.
Okay, that's, okay,
Yeah, that was a handout, and it was only handed out to the planning board members.
okay, thanks.
Now, yeah, you're welcome. Stormwater. Where to begin with this one? Bob is right. You can't stop the stormwater, but any good engineer or any engineer takes every precaution to limit the amount that leaves the site they are developing or plan to develop. Now, I appreciate his explanation of his understanding of Article 10, Section A and Section B. I can see where he is coming from and what he's doing there. And it's going to actually end up being probably into the hands of the planning board to make that determination. But good design does not allow an increase of stormwater to leave the site, such that that amount of flow and volume that will leave the site could be or will be detrimental to the downstream landowners. Now, it was suggested that the wood lots on the other side of Juniper Lane, which are not in the subdivision in question, they're in our subdivision, being of woodlands provides some sort of measure. That's true, it does. But you can't use that to offset any increase coming off of the existing subdivision. You got to treat the water coming off of your subdivision that you create by an increase. There's going to be an increase in flow. There's going to be an increase in volume with this construction period. Eventually, there'll be houses, driveways, lawns, and all of those. The best scenario is just to leave it woodlands like it is. Changing any of the woodlands is going to cause an increase in flow. Now, there were discussions about significance of pre-development, post-developments. It was insignificant. How much is insignificant? All of that. Having the fire pond there acts in somewhat of a stormwater management facility. I say somewhat because if the pond isn't full, water will go into the pond until it gets full, and at that point there will be some settling, there will be some slowing down. But as soon as that pond is full, there's no outlet structure other than the emergency overflow spillway that is controlling any of the outlet flow. In reality, it wouldn't be that difficult to really meet the Section 10A criteria of all new construction and development designed to minimize stormwater runoff from the site in excess of the pre-natural development condition, or natural pre-development conditions, by putting a controlled stormwater outlet structure in the fire pond. That way, when the fire pond is full and it's about to overflow, it gets released at pre-development rates. And that minimizes the disturbance and potential destruction downstream. You might have to change the shape and the size of the basin a little bit for extra storage volume to meet what the 25-year storm is. That's typically like what was said was designed to. We're not trying to design for the natural disaster that comes through, which we can't design for anyways. The only people I know that designs for the 100-year flood is the railroad. And actually they design for the 500-year flood. So the most standard is the 25-year flood. That's an acceptable practice for the whole development subdivision, the whole subdivision designed out, which, if I understood Bob correctly, is when they did the preliminary calculations in the original submittal, they used HydroCAD, and they did that. They incorporated what they assumed would be pervious, impervious with the site build out. So I don't, it's hard to say that that table and that document submittal is valid or not, because all it is just a pre and post. And that's where the request for seeing some design calculations, which really all he has to do is print the report from HydroCAD. That'll show that, you know, what assumptions have been made and whether or not those are reasonable assumptions and the results are reasonable in value. So that's we're just concerned as downstream abutters. We're already experiencing a lot of rainwater overflow runoff coming through, that developing this project upstream is going to increase runoff, and by having the fire pond that doesn't have a controlled outlet structure, is just the water's just going to come down faster and more frequently and at a higher volume and at a higher flow rate, which will cause more damage. Water does a lot of damage. The faster it flows and the more you have of it. And we're just trying to look out for our interests and even the lake too. Eventually all this water goes into Lovejoy Pond, and we don't want any, you know, sediment or extra contaminants going in. And if we can control the flow, or the control can be controlled, that minimizes that impact. Doesn't eliminate it, but it helps minimize that impact. I'm just looking at my notes here. He made a comment about minimizing the impact. It's kind of hard to minimize the impact when there's no control of the outlet of the water. Like I said, once that fire pond is full, it's going to overflow. You know, some of the control minimizing might be if there's evaporation and you fill that before it hits the outlet structure. But I do believe that a simple fix, which I think would suffice, would be to put a controlled outlet structure in that fire pond that would help retain or retain and detain, do both, the water, such that it doesn't come out faster than it is currently coming across the site by the development. There's one thing we didn't talk about was that culvert at roughly, I think it's station 10+60, the new pipe culvert. And I mean, there might be insignificant increase from the road running off, but it's an increase. And I don't know if there's a way that we can do some sort of measure before it hits that stream and before it goes through that culvert that could also minimize some of the flow. I'm not as concerned about that as I am the fire pond, mainly just because most of the water is going to the fire pond and then coming out of the fire pond into the level spreader. And I think the level spreader is a great idea at the end of it. I just like to see some sort of control coming out of the fire pond, if that makes sense. And I believe everything else, you know, has been pretty much addressed, I think. There are some other comments in there that you could read through my letter and read through Bob's answers for it. And again, I appreciate Bob taking the time to look at the January 17th letter on such short notice and being able to provide some clarity on that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Planning board members have any questions for Mr. Benke? Okay. Are there others who would like to make comment? Mr. Norris, correct? Anything further? Okay. Anyone in the Zoom space with additional comments you'd like to make?
I would like to say something if possible.
Okay, could you give us your name for the record, please?
My name is Ricardo Lambert and I own a property at 183 Manitoma Camp Road. And I have owned this property for about 3.5 years. And in those 3.5 years, 2 of the culverts that are coming down from the entrance to Manitoma Camp Road down towards the water, 2 of those culverts have failed at significant cost to the owners to repair. And I'm worried that any additional taxing of, I don't mean taxes, but any additional impact on those culverts, we're going to see more failures. And I know that they were talking about some 25-year events or 100-year events, but I've only owned this place for 3.5 years, and I've seen 2 of these on 2 different occasions, 2 different storms, let's say, 2 of these culverts fail. And I know that we have had some significant weather, et cetera, and that is going to continue, and I get that, but I am very worried of any additional impact of stormwater, any additional water coming our way. We're going to see a lot more failure, and that failure also impacts the road. That road is fragile in many ways, and I know it's not used all year for the most part. You know, there's just very few people who are there year round, but though any failures impact that road significantly, and we see, you know, washing away of the bluestone, we see some flattening of certain areas, and definitely see some of the edges of the road washing away. So I just want to be very clear that I'm hoping that the board takes any and all measures they can to minimize any additional impact on this road and protect that lake, because there is no question all that extra water is going right into that lake, right in, and it's going to impact even further any water quality on that lake and every lake going down the chain until we get to the Dead River and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Others who would like to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to comment if I can.
Okay, please go ahead. Identify yourself for the record, please.
Yep, my name is Julia Kluke, and I also own a property in the Manitoma Association. I actually joined the call to make sure that everyone's aware that there are those of us in the association that support John and this project. I've known John personally, as well as my ownership for 5 years at Manitoma. He has a long track record of how he's developed land, developed properties, takes this work very seriously. As well, I think it's important to call out that our association used mainland engineers when we were doing our own septic work. So we obviously have confidence in them and the work that they do as it relates to projects of this nature. And I think I just want to add one more comment as I listen tonight. I think I offer a differing opinion. While there are, you know, always implications when new developments take place, I caution everyone from putting too much on this development. You know, our association has a lot of deferred maintenance, and we do have some challenges with the grounds and whatnot, but some of that is a result of as I've observed as a new member, just sort of years of deferred maintenance on the property itself. And so just ask that you take that into account as well. And again, just wanted to share that I, as an association member, support this development plans, and I think it'll be a nice addition to the area and a good utilization of the space there.
Thank you. Other comments, anyone? North.
I don't want anybody to believe that we don't want John to do this. We support him. We just want him to do it correctly. Simple.
Any other comments, anyone? Yeah. Okay. Seeing none, Jack.
I just had a follow-up question from what Mr. Benke was asking about, this controlled water structure. What is that, and is that feasible, and what would it help?
I couldn't hear all of that, but were you asking about a controlled outlet structure in the fire pond that I mentioned before and what that would entail and maybe look like?
I was asking mainland what that would be.
Oh, you're asking mainland, sorry.
Sorry, Mark. A good question, Jack. What it would entail is some redesign around the pond and adding an outlet structure that would fine tune control of the stormwater. Mark's idea for that design is not a bad one. It's just not required by ordinance as we interpret it, and we hope that you'll interpret it as well. There are thresholds to stormwater control. There's thresholds in your ordinance, and there's thresholds in DEP ordinance, and rules in our ordinance that rules. And we feel we've met both town and state ordinance with what we're proposing. And that's all. If you want more, then that's to be discussed. And I want to have that discussion with you. I can't agree to anything the butter asks for. I have to talk with you guys, so.
Could you just comment generally on what the cost of such a structure might be?
It could be $5,000 to $10,000 between the pond being enlarged, because it's not just a matter of putting a structure on there, because then that would raise the pond level. You raise the pond level too high, now we have potential for breakout and other issues. You gotta look at it holistically. So either the pond has to get deeper, we can't go too deep because you can't draw water up for a fire truck too high, right? It's about 15 feet, it's about all you have for suction on something like that. So then we're talking about enlarging and doing more earthwork plus the structure. It probably would add $5,000 to $10,000.
When you say that you meet our ordinance, part A was to minimize. And so if you're at this level and the structure would bring it down to this level, that would minimize more, right?
It would minimize more. My contention was that we're not part of the A part of that ordinance, that we're the B part of that ordinance.
Yeah, their
That was my
perspective was that B applies and not.
May I ask, understand, I'm a lawyer, not an engineer. What does an outlet structure consist of?
Great question. So usually there's many different kinds. If anyone's been to the ball fields in Scarborough, I designed an outlet structure there that was very specific, that had a slope to it. And it was a special design because it was a really large pond and there were lots of kids around. So I had to design a structure that had safety involved, that handled very large flow rates, and it was this giant concrete box that would take up a chunk of this room. Most pond outlets for something like this though are usually a catch basin structure. John, a concrete structure deep enough in the ground that the rising waters doesn't lift it or move it, and usually with a pipe outlet on one side, hole on the other side. And then of course we engineer that to try to figure out sometimes a weir on the inside to keep the water at the right level if we're really trying to fine tune it. So does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that also entails more maintenance.
Correct. It does entail more maintenance. Yes, it does. It's more prone to failure.
Is that what Mr. Benke is seeking?
I believe
Mr. Benke can answer that.
He should answer that, but I believe based on his comments, which I read, and they were very detailed, from engineer to engineer, it was a fun process. So, and I do appreciate what he's done, even if we don't agree on stuff. But I believe based on what he's written, he's talking about an outlet structure of that kind. Though I would ask you. to
Mr.
ask
Banky,
him.
do you want to comment on that?
Sure, I think, now I'm putting engineer hat on here. With the level spreader that is at the tail end of this structure, I think that it is possible, but I don't have the calculations or the numbers in front of me, that some sort of a weir structure in the emergency spillway throat, combined with the storage volume of the level spreader, might actually work, and you won't have to have this big circular culvert that's in there, and the maintenance would be very, very minimal. There might have to be some redesign on the size of the pond for freeboard storage, but I don't know, without running calculations, I wouldn't know that. Bob might have a better idea on that, but I was thinking more of some sort of a weir structure in the overflow spillway, along with the combination of the storage volume in the level spreader. I think that you could accomplish enough to contain the majority of storms that come and will not have an adverse effect downslope. The downslope adverse effect I could get into civil penalties, and I don't want to go down that route civilly. Even though the ordinance, however you guys view the ordinance, I do agree that the application as it sits meets on the state level is the PBR, the permit by rule, from what I gathered in talking with Maine DEP. But I also understood that A was still a part. It wasn't an A or B thing. It was a part, but I can also see where, with Bob's clarification of how he interpreted it, where they're coming from. I understand that, but as a downstream landowner, all I can say is there's going to be an increase in stormwater, and I really don't want to see that increase coming through our property, because it'll just cause more damage. And if there's a way we can limit that effectively, efficiently, without an increased economic cost to the developer, we're not against the development. Like Mr. Norris said, I encourage development. I design sites all this time, and I know what it's like to do it, and I know what Bob's going through, and with all the public comments and everything, and I think it'll be a welcomed addition to have it up there. I just want to make sure that the development doesn't pose or cause any adverse reaction downstream. And that's all I have, unless you want anything else to explain the outlet structure. But I think it's possible to do it with like a concrete weir or something in the throat of the emergency spillway, which is somewhat low maintenance compared to an outlet structure, like a circular outlet structure with a anti-vortex type on top. But now I'm geeking out, so I'm going to stop.
It's a trade, it's a weakness of the trade, I would think that.
Okay, one last call for comment, anyone? Any other comments? I would take those now. And if not, I'll turn back to the planning board. We have a couple of options. Originally I was thinking that, the first option would be to deliberate and make some decision tonight. Alternatively, we could put this on the agenda for the next meeting, which personally I'm inclined to do, given all of the conversation we had tonight and the fact that we did get some additional pieces of written information that we've not had a chance to review yet. And there were a few questions that came up that Mainland is going to provide answers on. So we would like to get those back as well, but I'd like to hear from you about how you'd like to proceed.
I'd like to make a motion that we close the public hearing on Manitoba Woodlands subdivision with the condition that the Maine land development consultants provide a copy of the vernal pool report for review. The review of the report will be delegated to the board chair and the town attorney. And furthermore, if the report does not meet the legal and regulatory requirements for completing such studies, the public hearing will be reopened. I think they've met the requirements. I think that they've been very gracious in answering all the questions from the public. I think some of the things that are being asked for from the abutters are things that they would like to see happen, but they're not required by our land use ordinance, they're not required by law. I think it would be nice if they could work these out between the parties and build these into the plans if they're amenable to do it, but I don't think it's the planning board's position to intervene in these kinds of things when they're not required by us or the town.
I think there were, a couple of other questions that came up that Mainland was going to respond to, as well. There certainly was the vernal pool issue.
I would make it, I would support closing the public hearing.
Okay, all right, so we
So
have,
should we amend the,
Yeah, maybe amend it to
Yeah.
simplify that.
to put those additional requirements in?
amend it to what, I'm sorry?
So what are the additional requirements that you'd like to put in there? I was concerned about Jack's comments about the vernal pool, and I want to make sure that we've done that, so I
Yeah, I
can
think
put that in
that's okay.
the motion. But there are other things that you would.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
that's predicated on having, I don't think closing the hearing prevents them from submitting them. or
I don't
us
believe it does,
requiring them.
but what I asked is that the board chair review it with the town attorney to ensure that it's met the legal requirements, and if there is an issue, then it should be brought back to our attention, and we should probably reopen, I don't know what the remedy is, but probably reopen the hearing.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that we can reopen the hearing. We have your motion.
I'll
Henry
second it- I'll
second.
second it, but I have maybe an amendment.
All right, your amendment
I would
is,
just say, just to close the public hearing and, and to ask the applicant to please submit the information that's, agreed upon during the meeting.
And
Take the rest of that out because that's not relevant.
All right, so you want me to try to restate this motion? I think that's, okay. So I move to close the public hearing on the Manitoba Woodland subdivision.
Sorry.
Okay, that's it?
That's it.
All
Yeah,
right, but do you want to put anything subject to them for,
We can do that.
we can do that after.
Second.
second, all right, we have a motion second to close the hearing. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Okay. By agreement, there is information outstanding that you'll provide back to the board on vernal pools and several other issues as well.
Yes.
And so my inclination would be for us to reflect a bit on the conversation we had tonight. We have an opportunity now to review all the written material, and we did get another piece just this evening that none of us have read yet. So to look at all of that, and we can put this back on the agenda for the 11th of February, which is our next scheduled regular meeting, for continued discussion and board deliberation. That is amenable to everyone. That work? All right. Anything else on this before we move away from it?
I just wanted to make a comment publicly that I appreciate the applicant's level of effort here. I think it is above and beyond the typical
absolutely.
process that we would
Yeah.
see, and so thank you for going to long.
And the road association as well, for all the due diligence they did into their self-employed.
Yeah, and Marcus, I appreciate the public.
Yeah, both
Very helpful.
the interested parties and the applicant, I think, have done an outstanding job.
And the time. Thank you for taking the time tonight.
Okay, thank you all very much. We appreciate all your comment and participation. It's really helpful to us. And we will put this back on the agenda for February 11th. No, we have a set of minutes to do. Okay, well, while they're packing up, we do have minutes from January 14th. Peter provided a few comments to Angelica. I read those and I'm in agreement. Anyone else have comments on January 14th?
This was, we get paid the big money.
Is there a motion? Looking for second?
Second.
Dana seconds, discussion. All those in favor?
Thank you.
Abstain.
Henry, abstention. Okay, and just a reminder, we have an LUO revision workshop next Tuesday, the 4th of February.
That's at 5:30.
And we will start at 5:30. We'll do 5:30 to 8 again. That seems to work for those. So, are you, you're not?
I'll talk to you.
Peter, that's right. You're not going to be able to be here.
I may be able to be here. I
Um,
shouldn't say. We're coming back that way, so.
Yeah.
For maybe.
And I think what we need to do at that meeting next week, we didn't finish the list, and I think we need to complete the list of items and the drafts that we have.
So this piece are kind of a critical piece.
Yeah, are we gonna have your solar piece at some point?
I was just talking to Chip about it before the meeting. I can certainly give you an update on my thoughts on it. Yeah, I mean, there's not much, I looked at it very carefully. I talked, there was a couple of pieces that I was concerned. I'll just tell you now.
Can you redline them?
No, there's nothing to redline.
There's
The only-
nothing to redline,
The
okay.
only thing that would be considered a change, and I would recommend, is the language that Peter talked about related to the character of the town and that phrase. If we wanted to discuss that, that's like a more broader topic, though, right?
Yeah, and that's not specific to the solar ordinance.
Well, it's in the solar ordinance.
Yeah,
Is
it's in a lot of places.
It's in a lot of places, so whatever's decided, that's the only necessary impact, but the topics of the deeding, the decommissioning, the other components that have been brought up by various developers, the fire, the setbacks for the roofing, things like this. I personally reviewed that. I've talked to other communities. I've talked to Chip a little bit about it. There's no need to change it.
There's no changes to be made.
There's
in
no
your
changes.
view.
Those are solid materials, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing incorrect. Doesn't mean that everybody likes them, but it is for the balanced best interest of the community, and it has been adopted by other communities as well.
If I could, I had one suggestion, just to throw it out there, maybe for discussion at the next meeting, is some reason when it was decided who, different size, the large ones, small, medium, then there's the home ground solar, and then there's the roof solar.
Correct.
The ground solar was supposed to be a decision by the planning board. I'll tell you right now, I screwed up twice. I approved them. But it just seems kind of trivial that it'll make it a lot easier rather than, burdening the board with it, because it really is a very small project and it gets people to get.
That's a valid tweak. I mean, potentially, but it would only be for the small scale system.
Small scale, yeah.
Yeah, small residential ground scale, less than.
Yeah, whatever it is, it's on there, but just to change that from the board to.
The reason it's on there, by the way, just for your understanding, the reason it's on there for planning board approval is really has to do with like visual buffering and other aspects like that, which of course you can handle, but that's why it's on.
Right.
We didn't want people putting them in their front yard, the road.
Like the Blaine House.
On pole that rotates.
Okay.
Just to let everyone know, still won't be here next week. On the CID question of timing, there's nothing with solar in particular, but CID in general, whether the town should be able to have a meeting vote within 90 days rather than wait till the next annual meeting. I have sent an email to the town manager asking for his thoughts, just sent it yesterday. So hopefully I'll get an answer. If I get one before next Tuesday, I'll send an email out telling you what he says.
The question of whether it should apply to solar projects, I think in the ordinance is pretty clear. The answer is yes. Yes. There's a question is about just that, it's the procedure and timing, and that's not in the solar ordinance.
So, I mean, one of the more significant questions that came up some time ago was whether or not the CID provisions should apply to things like solar projects.
Yeah, we interpret it the way we interpreted it, and it's currently written, that it is.
Correct, right, and you don't believe a change should be made to that?
I think it's appropriate that the community gets to vote on a large solar project. The timing of that, though, is something that is a valid question, and I think that's just that's so if I could take a look at that other piece, but that's minor tweaking, very little.
Okay.
So, but I can get that done for you all before.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, anyone else, anything? All right, thanks, we're adjourned. Dinner time.
That whole Yeti of coffee.
Specify what the conditions are.
Good night.